Well, yesterday on the show, we talked about some of the down-ballot races voters here in Cook County will have to weigh in on, like the race for Metropolitan Water Reclamation Commissioner. That's a mouthful. We also talked about the 3 referenda in Illinois. Well, today, we're taking on another very large part of the ballot that causes a lot of head-scratching. It's the section where you're asked to vote for judges. Here to break that down is Daniel Kotin. He's president of the Chicago Bar Association. Welcome.
Thank you.
I was mentioning to you before the microphones went on, years ago, Mara Tapp, who used to host a show here, would do something called the Reading of the Green, where they would go through all the judges on the ballot, and you had said, I wish more people would read the green.
Well, that's true, Tony, because so much work goes into the Chicago Bar Association's Green Guide, which is what you're referring to. It's a 2-page document which summarizes thousands of hours of work that more than 200 lawyers put into evaluating judges that are on the ballot. And our hope would be that since we have an elected judiciary, that the public would take the time to educate themselves about the people that they're voting for. And one way to do so is to simply look at this 2-page Green Guide and follow the lead of many lawyers who are eminently qualified to evaluate judges and who did so.
Well, a couple of things here. How does one get a hold of the Green Guide? And do you think a lot of people don't know is because all they see, and I haven't seen a lot this time around, but typically are television commercials. Just like for every other position that's on the ballot, sometimes you see them for judges, so they don't have a lot to go on.
True, and there's 2 questions there. The Green Guide is available at chicagobar.org, which is the Chicago Bar Association's website. If you go on the website, it's pretty accessible. Once you log on, you'll see where the Green Guide is located, and you can print it out, and you can take the Green Guide. It's just a single piece of paper, double-sided. You can take it into the polling place with you. So that's something that can happen real easily. The problem is that the judicial ballot is at the bottom of the ballot.
Right.
There are many, many races on there. There are many, many judges that are seeking retention on there. And quite honestly, an awful lot of voters have voter fatigue by that point. They've already voted for a lot of contested races. They're in a hurry. They don't have time. They don't know any of these names that they're looking at, and so they don't bother voting. 2 statistics, Tony, that are very concerning are, number one, generally speaking, in our election cycle, almost half of voters don't even bother getting to the judicial part of the ballot. They just skip it. And that's not really our democracy. That doesn't ensure a fair judiciary. The other concerning factor has to do with the judges that are seeking retention. Mm-hmm. Those are the yes-no votes for the judges that are already elected to their seats.
And want to be retained on the bench.
They want to be retained. They need a 60% yes. A concerning detail is that in most elections, almost 20% of voters automatically vote no for every judge seeking retention, which is just a blanket no vote, which knocks everybody down to 80% as a starting point. Mm-hmm. And that's simply wrong.
Very fundamental question here. Why are judges elected?
Judges in Illinois are elected because that's what our Constitution provides for. Many states have elected judiciaries. Some states have appointed judiciaries. And we in Illinois have gone back and forth in terms of debating this issue for many, many years. Personally, I think that an elected judiciary is the only way to try to ensure a fair judicial system. When you have an appointed judiciary, it becomes incredibly political, and friends that I have that are in different states that have appointed judiciaries wish that they would change their systems and have elected judges.
Well, remind me, are the judges who run, are they running as a Republican or a Democrat? Do we know that when they run? Or
yes.
So doesn't that, for a lot of voters, it's almost, it could be the same as appointed. Well, if I'm electing a judge who says they're a Democrat, you know what I'm trying to get at? Are they going to be fair and impartial? Because there are a lot of issues that come before judges that are of a political nature.
Well, you make a good point there. In the primaries, Democrats run against Democrats and Republicans run against Republicans. Right. And then sometimes in the general election, you'll have a contested race between a Republican and a Democrat. But your point is well taken, because the work of a judge in applying the law to cases is really an apolitical job. There really shouldn't be any kind of a political position associated with sitting on the bench and making rulings on cases that come before him or her. For that reason, it would justify a non-party-oriented elected system.
But here, at least in Cook County, it sounds like it's used a lot against the judges because our courts seem to be, and correct me if I'm wrong here, headed by judges who are overwhelmingly Democrats. So you do hear that often from the other side when something isn't the outcome isn't something that they wanted.
That's true. That applies to judicial races in Cook County, and frankly, I think it applies to an awful lot of other elected positions in Cook County as well.
We are talking about the ballot that includes the judges way down at the ballot. Daniel Kotin is president of the Chicago Bar Association. Let's get down to the work that the Bar Association does. How do you evaluate?
It's our hope that every judge who is either running for election or seeking to be retained on the bench goes through the judicial evaluation process. And that process involves the judge filling out a form, so to speak, a team of investigators doing investigations by interviewing dozens of people who have appeared before that judge in his or her courtroom. Then
just lawyers or others as well, plaintiffs?
Primarily lawyers are the ones that are interviewed. Then a report is put together from the investigators. After that, the judges are asked to come into the hearing room, and they have a hearing in front of a panel of Judicial Evaluation Committee members who further interview the judge regarding issues that may have come up during the investigative process. After that, the Judicial Evaluation Committee will determine whether a judge is deemed highly qualified, or not recommended. Those are the three rankings.
Can you pull back the curtain a bit and give us a sense of sort of what questions are asked?
Well, the questions can vary from judge to judge, but the issues that the committee is looking at are seeking to determine the judge's qualifications based upon integrity, his or her legal knowledge, his or her legal ability, legal experience, temperament on the bench, whether this judge is well-tempered. That becomes an issue oftentimes. Diligence in terms of carrying out the roles of a judge. Punctuality, does the judge actually do things on time? And then finally, health factors. Is this person in a condition where he or she can serve for the next 6 years as a judge?
So how does that rating system work where that particular judge would come up qualified, yet someone else might not?
Well, if there's a contested race, and in this particular election there's only a couple of contested races on the November 8th ballot where there is going to be one judge who is either qualified or highly qualified and another judge who is deemed not recommended. Our green guide sets that forth, and hopefully voters will take the green guide with them into the polling place and make an appropriate choice.
I see. So all the other judges, we're just asking whether or not that judge should be retained, and the fact that that judge is there means that the CBA and others have deemed that judge qualified.
Not necessarily,
no?
Not at all, no. This year there are 58 judges that are on the retention ballot. So when you walk into the polling place on November 8th, there's going to be 58 judges for whom you vote yes or no, meaning you want the judge to stay on the bench or you want the judge off the bench. Each election cycle, the JEC does a full evaluation of each of those judges. Most of the time, there are 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 judges who the Chicago Bar deems not recommended to be retained. This time around, which is the first time in my career as a lawyer, all 58 judges have been deemed recommended for retention in this election cycle.
So wait, let me back up there. You said sometimes there are no recommendations, but yet they are on the ballot to be retained?
Sure. A judge is entitled to run for retention.
Yeah, sure.
And the Chicago Bar Association or any other bar organization doesn't have the right to kick a judge off the ballot. But our evaluation committee will evaluate the performance of that judge over the past 6 years and then make a recommendation to the public as to whether or not the public should retain that judge or take the judge off the bench.
So give us an example of when a judge was not recommended.
Well, it's happened in virtually every election cycle when a small percentage of judges that have gone through the process are deemed to not be qualified because of temperament or to be not qualified because that judge has been around too long and has lost his or her ability to be a sharp and effective judge. That can happen. There's an automatic not recommended rating for a judge who refuses to come through the Bar Association's evaluation process. And that happens. And that happened in 4 particular cases in this election cycle, where there are judges that are running for election who we've deemed not recommended simply because they refuse to participate in the evaluation process. And that's just a mere matter of refusal, means that judge cannot be deemed qualified because we don't have anything to evaluate.
So do you think where some of the problem arises, where when you said, some voters will just either mark no, yes, or leave it blank, that a judge who's seeking retention has not been recommended, an informed voter might read the green and say, oh, this judge is not recommended. I do not want to retain this judge. But they go into the polls and they might just automatically, for whatever reason, say, oh, yes. And so you will see that judge who's not been recommended ended up being retained.
It's very rare that a judge is voted off the bench when they're on the retention ballot. In fact, I think 1988 was the last time that a judge seeking retention was actually came in under the 60% threshold and was voted off the bench. So the shame there is that there were probably many judges over the past 20-plus years who should have been removed from the bench that weren't. The problem is when folks have talked about changing that 60% number in order to be retained and making it a higher rating percentage, the concern is that there are so many voters who vote no for everybody just because that's their nature, to kick everybody off the bench, that if you were to raise the percentage above 60%, the risk is that you're going to lose some very good judges.
We are talking about the races way down at the ballot, and for mine, I noticed I have about 70 judges that I have to contend with on the ballot. Maybe you have as many as well. And an important part of our democracy here, Daniel Kotin is president of the Chicago Bar Association, which rates judges. Can you give us a sense of what some of these judges actually do?
Well, that's an incredibly broad question because we have all sorts of different divisions in our court. The division that people spend most of their time focusing on because it makes all the news stories is the criminal division, which is at 26th in California, where the main felony courts are, and those are the judges that preside over the serious and violent criminal offenses. There are also all of the law and municipal court judges that handle the civil cases, the personal injury cases, the contract disputes. There's our domestic relations judges that handle divorce cases. There are probate judges that handle estates.
But they don't show up as that on the ballot. I guess what I'm wondering, I think when I looked on my ballot, there's circuit court, right? So where does that fit in to give people a sense of, oh, I'm voting for this judge for circuit court? I don't even know what that means.
Okay. On this particular ballot, you have there are 2 judges that are running for the appellate court, and that's the first level reviewing court after the circuit court. Those 2 judges that are both running in uncontested races, and both of those judges we've deemed to be highly qualified. Below that, we have the circuit court judges. There are 271 elected circuit judges. Those are the judges that I was speaking about a few moments ago that handle all of the courtroom matters that we were just talking about. A judge who's elected as a circuit judge does not get elected to sit on a particular case or sit in a particular type of case.
They're assigned cases.
They're assigned by the chief judge to a different division. Right.
You had mentioned the appellate, and I think you said just unopposed, just seeking retention, right?
Right.
And there's this 60% threshold.
Right.
What happens if that particular judge who's seeking retention doesn't get that 60% threshold? I guess I'm wondering what happens to the bench.
Okay. That doesn't have anything to do with those are 2 different topics right there.
Okay.
The 2 judges that are running for the appellate court in the Cook County area here are running unopposed as Democrats for the first time, seeking vacancies to the appellate court.
I see.
So that has nothing to do with retention. If one of the 58 judges that are seeking retention come in under the 60%, that judge leaves the bench and there becomes a vacancy in the court. The vacancy can be filled by the Supreme Court until the next election cycle, at which point that judge who stepped in to fill the vacancy has to run in a contested election, just like anybody else.
Final question for you, given what we've been experiencing this election with the controversy, the battle over the U.S. Supreme Court and the vacancy there. Do you think that's giving voters a heightened awareness of the importance of these particular races here in Illinois?
I sure hope so. There's probably been more attention paid to this election because of the ridiculous presidential election that's taking place than any other election that I can remember. And my hope is that people are going to be a little bit more tuned in. Maybe more voters will show up at the polling place than otherwise would. And once they're there, if we can convince them to simply take the time to go through the judicial ballot and make educated choices, then our system is working as it was designed.
Daniel Kotin, he is the president of the Chicago Bar Association. We've been talking about the election of judges here on the Morning Shift. Thanks so much for coming in and shedding some light on this.
Thank you very much, Tony. Great to be here.
Hear ye, hear ye. The court's in session. The court's in session. Now, here come the judge. Here come the judge. Here come the judge.
We're going to take a break. When we come back, a trip inside some of Chicago's most spectacular buildings. We'll talk with the author of The Space Within Inside Great Chicago Buildings. It's the Morning Shift on 91.5 FM.